There is a small cylinder of pink granite sitting in a glass case in London, and the spiral groove carved around it should not be possible with any tool the ancient Egyptians are supposed to have owned. It is the width of a soda can. It is labeled with a number, UC16036, and the marks on its surface are the closest thing we have to a fingerprint left behind by whatever actually cut the hardest stone at Giza. Because here is the question that pulled you in, and here is the answer up front. The granite at Giza was cut with something that drove into solid rock at a speed modern diamond drills cannot match. And the walls of the cut show the one detail that breaks the official story completely. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly what that detail is, and why the people who measured it first spent the rest of their lives unable to explain it. Most people walk right past this core. It looks like a leftover, a reject, a piece of waste stone that nobody bothered to throw away. But hidden on its surface is something that shouldn't exist. A continuous spiral groove, winding around the granite like the thread on a screw, cut so cleanly and so deep that the man who found it called it astonishing in print, and meant it literally. That man was Sir William Flinders Petrie. He is not a fringe theorist. He is the father of modern Egyptian archaeology, the man who turned grave robbing into a science, the most respected excavator of his generation. In 1881 and 1882, he spent a full year measuring the Giza Plateau with instruments more precise than anything used there before. And when he examined the drill cores and the saw cuts left in the granite, he wrote down numbers that have haunted engineers for over a century. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe and turn on the bell before we go further, because this one only gets stranger from here. Now let me set the scene properly. Granite is not limestone. The pyramids are mostly limestone, a soft sedimentary rock you can scratch with a copper tool and a patient afternoon. But the chambers deep inside, the sarcophagi, the temple blocks, the casing on certain structures, those are granite. Specifically the red and pink granite hauled from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers south. Granite is an igneous rock packed with quartz and feldspar crystals. Quartz sits at 7 on the hardness scale. Copper, the only metal the Egyptians are credited with using in the age of the pyramids, sits around 3. You cannot cut a 7 with a 3. It is like trying to slice steel with a stick of butter. And yet, the granite was cut, drilled, hollowed, squared, polished to surfaces so flat that modern engineers brought laser equipment to measure them and walked away unsettled. For over a century, the mainstream explanation was simple and reasonable on its face. Copper tubes, spun by hand or by bow, fed with wet quartz sand as an abrasive. The sand does the cutting, not the copper. The copper is just the carrier that drags the hard grit across the stone. Run it long enough, and you grind your way through anything. It is a clever theory. It has been demonstrated in controlled experiments. And for a lot of the simpler holes, it probably is exactly what happened. But that explanation has a problem. And the problem is, sitting right there in the spiral groove on core U, C16036. Here is the first clue, and it is the one that started everything. When Petrie studied the cores left behind by the drilling, he measured the groove that wraps around them. He found that the cut sank into the granite at a rate of 1/10 of an inch for every single revolution of the drill. He wrote that the spiral sinks 1/100th of an inch in a circumference of 6 inches, a rate of plowing out the quartz and feldspar, which is, in his word, astonishing. To Petrie, this was not a scratch from loose sand wandering around in a hole. This was a feed rate, the signature of a tool being driven downward into the rock under enormous controlled pressure. The mainstream reading says those rings are just irregular marks, the natural result of uneven pressure as a sand-fed copper tube wobbled its way down. And in some cores, that is plausible. But watch what happens when you push on the number. A feed rate of 1/10 of an inch per revolution into solid granite is staggering. Engineers who replicate ancient drilling with copper and sand measure progress not in tenths of an inch per turn, but in tiny fractions of that, grinding for hours to sink a single inch. One analysis put the ancient feed rate at roughly 500 times faster than a modern diamond drill, even though the ancient drill would have been turning far slower than a modern drill's 900 revolutions a minute. Slower rotation, deeper bite. That combination is not what abrasion does. That is what a hard cutting point does when it is pressed hard enough to carve. That is the first clue. Now we get to the one that the sand theory genuinely cannot survive. Petrie noticed something about the groove that nobody has comfortably explained in the 140 years since. The spiral cut deeper through the quartz than through the feldspar. Read that again, because it is the whole case in a single sentence. Granite is a mix of crystals. Quartz is the harder mineral. Feldspar is the softer one. If you are grinding stone away with loose sand, the soft material always erodes faster than the hard material. Always. The sand wears down feldspar easily and struggles against quartz. So the groove should be deeper in the soft feldspar and shallower in the hard quartz. It is the opposite. The cut goes deeper through the quartz, the harder crystal, than through the softer feldspar around it. That is not how grinding works. That is not how abrasion works. That is how a fixed cutting tool works. A hard point, harder than quartz, mounted in the drill, slicing cleanly through every crystal it meets and biting hardest into the densest material, the way a sharp blade cuts cleaner through a knot in wood than through the soft grain. Loose sand cannot do this. Loose sand takes the path of least resistance. Whatever cut this core took the path of most resistance and won. For decades, this detail was dismissed as a misreading or quietly left out of the popular retelling. Then people went back to the actual cores. The engineer Christopher Dunn spent hours inside the Petrie Museum in London with the artifacts in his hands. By carefully threading the grooves on the core known as UC1 6306, he confirmed it was not a series of separate rings at all. It was a single continuous helix, one spiral, cut in one pass, winding from top to bottom, not similar to a machine thread, not reminiscent of one, the same. Now, before we go further, an honest word. There has been pushback. When the acoustics engineer, John Reed, and the stonemason Harry Brownlee physically examined the famous Petrie core number 7, they argued the marks were individual concentric rings, not the true spiral, and said they resembled cores found in any modern English quarry. That is a real objection, and it deserves to be on the table. But here is what keeps the mystery alive. Petrie described the spiral in 1883. The chemist, Alfred Lucas, decades later, and with no theory to sell, described cores with as many as 17 equally spaced spiral grooves. These men made their observations long before anyone proposed lost technology. They had nothing to prove and no agenda to push. And the deeper through the quartz problem does not go away no matter how you label the grooves. The rings are debated. The mineral hardness is not. That is the drilling. Now look at the cutting, because the saws tell the same story. This is the second major clue, and it is written into the walls of the cuts themselves. Petrie did not only study cores, he studied the slabs of granite and diorite that had been sawn straight through. Diorite is even harder than granite, and on the faces of these saw cuts he found something that should not be there. Grooves running the length of the cut, parallel, regular, as deep as 1/100th of an inch, scored into a rock harder than steel. He concluded that these lines were not made by loose powder rubbing back and forth. He wrote that it appeared far more likely they were produced by fixed jewel points set into the saw. Not sand, hard gemstone teeth, mounted in the blade, dragged through the stone in a single controlled stroke, each one carving its own clean line down the wall of the cut. And he calculated the force. Petrie estimated that a pressure of 1 to 2 tons Bearing down on those jeweled saws would have been required to cut through granite that hard. 1 to 2 tons of controlled, steady downward pressure on a blade in a desert 4,500 years ago. The walls of the cut do not show the chaos of hand grinding. They show the clean, parallel striations of a blade fed under massive, consistent force. The walls show the tool, and the tool was not a copper saw with a handful of sand. And the saws themselves were not small. From the kerf marks left in the granite of the temple blocks, Petrie worked out that some of the saw blades used at Giza must have been enormous, on the order of 9 feet long, to leave the cuts they left. Picture that for a moment. A blade longer than a person is tall, driven through diorite, leaving walls scored so evenly that the striations run parallel from one end of the cut to the other. A loose sand saw drifts. It wanders, it leaves a ragged, uneven trench. These cuts are straight, and the grooves are regular. And regularity is the one thing random abrasion never gives you. Regularity is the signature of a fixed point doing the same thing on every pass. There is one more object that belongs here, sitting in the open sand south of the Great Pyramid. It is a block of granite with a contour cut into it, a smooth, cylindrical curve scooped out of the solid stone, as if someone had pressed a rounded blade into the rock and removed a perfect arc. It is not a flat cut, it is a shaped cut, a curved profile in granite, the kind of contour that in a modern shop you would produce on a machine. Nobody has a settled answer for how it was made by hand. It just lies there in the desert. Another piece of the same puzzle, another cut without a knife. And there is a logistical weight to all of this that the tool marks alone do not capture. The granite did not grow at Giza. It came from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers up the Nile. Every block of it was quarried, freed from the bedrock, moved to the river, floated north, dragged to the plateau, and only then cut, drilled, and finished to these tolerances. The cutting is the part that survives, but the cutting sat at the end of a supply chain that stretched the length of a country. Whatever the builders were doing, they were doing it deliberately, at scale, with hard stone they chose to haul across the desert, specifically because it was hard, when softer stone was lying all around them. They wanted the granite, they wanted the difficulty, and they had the means to beat it. The argument over how has run for well over a century, and it has never closed. Petrie said jewel points and fixed cutting teeth in 1883. The chemist Alfred Lucas spent 35 years arguing back, insisting quartz sand alone could account for it, citing case after case of sand drilling granite. But even Lucas could not explain why concentric lines formed on the cores, the very feature Petrie hung his case on. The disagreement between the two men is usually summarized by laying their own words side by side across that 35-year span. And what you see is two careful, honest investigators who could not reconcile what the same stone was telling them. That argument is not settled today. The cores are still in the museum. The question Petrie raised in 1883 is still open. That is the second clue. Now we get to the part that no single tool mark can explain on its own. The part where the scale of the thing takes over. Because this is not one freak artifact. If it were one strange core, you could shrug it off. But the same fingerprint shows up across the plateau and beyond it. Petrie cataloged core after core, hole after hole. A core hole in diorite at Giza with regularly spaced grooves. Limestone fragments showing how holes were placed edge to edge to remove material by coring. Granite at Abu Ghurab with spiral grooves done examined in person. Basalt at Abu Sir showing the same suggestive marks. This was not a one-time accident. This was a method. A repeatable, industrial-scale process applied again and again to the hardest stone in the country. And then there are the boxes. In the rock tunnels beneath Saqqara, at a site called the Serapeum, there are giant granite boxes. Each one weighs in the range of 70 tons, carved from single blocks of granite, with lids that add tons more. And when engineers measured them, the numbers stopped sounding ancient. The inside surfaces are flat, not roughly flat, flat to a precision that modern shops chase with machine tools and optical instruments. The walls are square to each other and parallel to each other, across surfaces taller than a person. The corners hold a radius tighter than half an inch, where the flat inside wall meets the side. To finish the inside of a box that deep, while keeping that corner that sharp and that surface that true, is a task that challenges modern stoneworking even now. Christopher Dunn brought laser alignment tools, ultrasonic thickness gauges, inside micrometers, and an optical flat to the Serapeum to test whether the surfaces were finished to optical precision. He came expecting craftsmanship. He found tolerances that read like a specification sheet. The builders had not only made the inside surfaces flat, they had made them flat in two directions at once, true when measured vertically and true when measured horizontally, and then made opposite walls parallel to each other across the full span of the box. Flat, square, and parallel, all at the same time, on granite, by hand, with the walls of a container heavier than a truck. That is not decoration. That is precision engineering. And it shows up not in one box, but in box after box, lined up in the tunnels beneath Saqqara, like products off a line. So now, stack it all up. A spiral that cuts deeper through the hard crystal than the soft one. Saw walls scored by fixed jewel points under 2 tons of pressure. Drill feed rates that outrun modern diamond. 70-ton boxes finished flat to a fraction of a hair. This is the picture the granite gives us. And it is a picture of capability that by every official timeline simply was not supposed to be in the room. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? That a lost super civilization with electricity and machine shops built the pyramids and then vanished without leaving a single tool behind? Probably not. And that missing tool is the honest weak point in the whole case. We have the cores, we have the saw cuts, we have the boxes. We do not have the drill bits or the saw blades themselves. The actual cutting tools have never been found. That absence is real, and anyone selling you certainty is skipping past it. But that does not make the discovery ordinary, not even close. Because the grounded explanation is still extraordinary. What the granite is really telling us is that the people who built Giza possessed a stoneworking technology far more advanced, far more precise, and far more powerful than the simple copper and sand picture allows. Maybe the tools were tipped with corundum, the gemstone Petrie suspected, second only to diamond in hardness, mounted as fixed points rather than scattered as loose grit. Maybe the drills were driven by a mechanism that delivered tons of steady pressure we have not reconstructed. Maybe there were techniques of leverage, weighting, and rotation that were so ordinary to the builders that nobody bothered to draw them, and so they vanished completely. The tools rotted, rusted, or were melted down and reused, the way valuable metal always is. What survives is the negative space, the cut, not the knife. And here's what that means if you follow it all the way down. It means we have systematically underestimated the people who built these monuments. It means a body of practical, hard-won engineering knowledge existed, was used at industrial scale on the hardest stone on Earth, and was then lost so completely that we are reduced to reading it backward off the marks it left behind. We are forensic investigators standing over a cut, trying to reconstruct the blade from the wound. And the wound keeps telling us the blade was sharper than it had any right to be. The deeper through the quartz groove is the detail that should keep you up tonight. Not because it proves aliens or Atlantis, but because nobody has ever cleanly explained how a culture limited to copper tools left behind the unmistakable signature of a fixed cutting point, harder than quartz, driven under enormous force in a single continuous spiral. The mainstream says sand. The stone says otherwise. And the stone was there. That granite core is still sitting in its case in London. You see 16036. The spiral still wraps around it. The cut is still deeper through the hard crystal than the soft one, exactly as it was when Petrie measured it. Exactly as it will be long after everyone reading this is gone. Nobody has thrown it away. Nobody has fully solved it. It just sits there in the quiet, a 4,000-year-old answer to a question we have not figured out how to ask. If this rewired how you see the people who built the pyramids, the next investigation goes deeper into what they actually knew. Watch it on screen now, and I will see you inside.